for years now, Canada has known about the dark history of the residential school. And it's heartbreaking. It's awful. It's a part of our history that is uh, something that is credible, that we need to know more about, that as Canadians, we feel like that is a part of our history that needs to be addressed and acknowledged and hopefully preventable. Just like any other country, as you know, I've been saying, there's always a dark story or a dark past to any country that is formed. There's no such thing as a perfect uprising, if you will. And this has led to, the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Day. This is in revoke to finding the unmarked mass graves in BC, the residential schools. But there's been an update to this, ladies and gentlemen. Um, this is from Juno News, and not Juno the music awards. Juno, just regular Juno News. Ottawa to seize funding residential schools unmarked grave searches. The federal government will discontinue funding a committee created to help Indigenous communities look for unmarked graves at former residential schools at the end of next month. The federal government will discontinue funding a committee created to help Indigenous communities look for unmarked graves at former residential schools at the end of next month. Although the search began in 2021, no bodies have been located. The National Advisory Committee on Residential Schools, Missing Children, and Unmarked Burials is extremely disappointed to learn that the Government of Canada has decided to discontinue funding to support their work to help Indigenous communities in their efforts to identify, locate, and commemorate missing children, and is urging the federal government to reconsider. Vote the NAC in a statement released Thursday. The committee, co-administered by the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and the Federal Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, was launched in 2021. Its creation was in response to claims made by about 200 potential burial sites based on ground-penetrating radar at the former Kamloops Indian residential school site. We are extremely concerned by this decision, said NAC member Kona Williams. We urge the federal government to reconsider this decision, which we believe to be a giant step backward on the path of reconciliation. The Kamloops story gained international attention, prompting Ottawa to create an interactive online map marking the locations of former residential schools to help identify unmarked graves, as the majority of residential school buildings have been demolished. The Indian Residential Schools interactive map allows the public to locate where the former building stood and includes historical and contemporary aerial footage. However, nearly 4 years later, no human remains have been recovered, and the Temkiplis and the God, I can't even pronounce that. Temkiplis First Nation has maintained anomalies had been discovered, but has since stopped short of calling them graves. So that's kind of an interesting highlight there, that we put so much emphasis on Truth and Reconciliation Day. As heartbreaking as that story is, and as people need to acknowledge that that is part of our Canadian history, that's something that is the dark side to our heritage and something we need to understand and acknowledge the darkness of our history. What's even more disgusting, and we've seen this throughout Truth and Reconciliation Day, all the events, all the progress that they've been saying that they made, is they put millions and millions of dollars backing campaigns to look for these burial sites. But I've not seen any sort of action to protect the Indigenous people today. We put so much emphasis on Truth and Reconciliation Day that Justin Trudeau took as a vacation day. He went over to BC to do some surfing because that's how much he cares about the Indigenous population. He's probably going to think about things when he's hitting the hightail. But no action on the Indigenous communities that still have boiled water advisories. Where's the commitment to get them clean water? Where's the commitment to make sure their reservations are secure? Is there anything for that? No. But they made this day up to make it look and pander and virtue signal that they care about Indigenous Canadians. The same way that Joe Biden created Juneteenth as a way, as virtue signaling, to reach out to the Black community, saying that, oh, we reconcile, we understand, we want to understand the long dreaded history of slavery, but yet they don't do anything for the mass incarceration. They don't change any policy to benefit the Black and brown communities, but they create Juneteenth as a federal holiday. That's plain out virtue signaling. So here's Blender News pointing out the Liberals spent millions of taxpayer dollars searching for unmarked graves at residential schools. They have found nothing and are now quietly defunding the community. They lied loudly and are now silently backtracking. Is this a mistake or manipulation? So they had a breakdown short here. Take a look.
After 3 years and millions of tax dollars spent, the federal government is pulling the plug on a committee that was supposed to help find unmarked graves at former residential schools. And despite all the outrage over this funding cut, here's the simple fact. Not a single body has been found. Not one. The Canadian residential school system was a harmful institution designed to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children. Within these schools, many children suffered abuse, leading to lasting impacts on the Indigenous communities. There's no denying that. However, when it comes to unmarked graves, there is no evidence that they exist. Yet we're still being told this is a betrayal. Crystal Gale Fraser, a founding member of the now defunded committee, says, "We are losing sight of our values around truth and reconciliation. But is it really a betrayal to stop funding a search that hasn't produced any results? Or is it simply long overdue accountability?" This entire initiative began after the 2021 Kamloops announcement that ground-penetrating radar had detected potential burial sites. The country was thrown into turmoil, international headlines condemned Canada, the Prime Minister lowered the flags for months and ultimately blamed the Pope. But here we are years later with no forensic findings and no confirmed remains. In any other situation, a lack of evidence after several years of searching would warrant a serious reassessment. For those wondering, the Canadian government has already spent over $216 million tax dollars through 146 funding agreements to Indigenous communities and organizations aimed at documenting, locating, and commemorating children from residential schools, as well as identifying unmarked burial sites associated with these institutions.
$216 million. 416 federal documents and federal agencies to look for unmarked graves. They found nothing. And yet that money could have went towards helping reservation communities right now that are still dealing with boil water advisories. They don't have access to clean drinking water. They don't have access to electricity. They don't have access to the basic necessities. Did you see how this has been a big farce? Do you see that this is virtue signaling 101? That really they don't actually give a damn about the Indigenous communities, that they're just putting money to a situation because they've been caught red-handed. They got egg on their face of past history. That, by the way, was under Justin Trudeau's own father, Pierre Trudeau, allowed for these institutions to operate. So, is he condemning his father's history? Is he condemning Canada and looking to actually understanding the turmoil and actually doing something for the Indigenous community? Not really. Not really in this case. It may look that way when they're funding a bunch of communities to gather together to look for unmarked graves and dig up the people that were lost and abused and potentially died, endure with these residential schools. Yet at the same time, they're not committed to anything positive for the current Indigenous population. Just like how Joe Biden, again, perfect example, Joe Biden with Juneteenth. Did that actually do anything in benefit to the Black community? Did that do anything for the working class African Americans that are also dealing with cost of living, that are dealing with a crisis, that are mass incarcerated at a higher rate? Did they get any benefit from Joe Biden? Joe Biden, I don't want my kids raised in a racial jungle. No. But they made Juneteenth a holiday so that federal employees get a day off and pretend to give a damn. So that they can run their mouth and give lip service and do a feely mouth word salad to pretend that they give a damn. So that's all this is proving.
More than 100 Indigenous communities are conducting their own searches, and the government is still offering funding through the Residential School Missing Children Community Support Fund, which honestly is questionable in my opinion. But regardless of that, this isn't about abandoning Indigenous communities. It's about cutting off a committee that was clearly more focused on keeping itself funded than producing any results. Judy Gingell, chair of the Yukon Residential School Missing Children's Project, says the decision is cruel and that the government has pulled the rug out from under survivors. But what's truly cruel is pushing a narrative of mass graves without evidence to back it up, keeping people in a constant state of trauma, both Indigenous and Canadians who carry the guilt for something that doesn't appear to be true, while funneling public money into initiatives that haven't provided any results. The truth matters, and if after years of searching nothing has been found, then maybe the real betrayal was how quickly this entire situation was treated as unquestionable fact, and how it was deliberately used to make Canadians resent their own culture. Cutting this funding isn't a betrayal. It's an overdue correction.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. All the years, all the guilt, all the rhetoric, and again, it's not whether this happened or not. It's not denying the fact that there wasn't residential schools. Obviously, look at the history of this nation. Like I said, any nation has a dark backstory. And this is one of ours. We had residential schools that there's been countless tales and countless documents of, kidnapping young Indigenous children, bringing them to residential schools that they could be ushered into society under the guise of the Catholic Church and the Canadian government. We know about this, and we know about the dark history that comes with it, the abuse, the scandals. But to take advantage of this, to take advantage of this dark history and the turmoil that people went through, to enrich yourself through a federal program based off of inconclusive evidence is disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And it's not the fact that people don't give a damn that are calling this out. It's the fact that we allocate this money to help Indigenous people, and all that's been done is flourish these government agencies to remain intact. It has nothing to do with actually helping the Indigenous population. Again, I go back to the boiled water advisory. I go back to the people in these in Indigenous communities that don't have the basic needs of survival that they were falsely promised under Justin Trudeau. And yet they spend a fortune creating these agencies, creating all these advancements into finding these unmarked graves. And time after time, it has come up inconclusive. And it comes to a point where you have to look at this and go, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? Could that money actually be used to benefit in a better way than creating federal agencies based off a scandal that has no real substantial evidence to back those claims? But that is pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing that in 2025, now we're finding out they have no evidence, and now finally they're cutting back on the spending of these agencies, the spending of these federal gatherings to manipulate and traumatize people off a scandal that clearly need more investigating before we jump the bandwagon.